It's the weekly show with David J. Maloney. This week, David talks to journalist and filmmaker Ben Raines. And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome to everyone at home, and I would normally say our studio audience to the weekly show. I am your host, David J. Maloney. I say normally because we usually shoot the show before a small studio audience at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, but we are still shooting from home due to coronavirus concerns. And because we are still shooting from home, sitting in again tonight for our regular house band, the Mogiles, is my son, Gianni. So, Fox News has recently suspended Judge Jeanine Pirro, and she was visibly upset. In fact, her face would have fallen if it could have. And Delta Airlines is struggling. To give you some idea as to how bad it is, their planes have been named honorary New York jets.
1091, report speed.
Oh, and sadly, Doomsday TV preacher Irvin Baxter has passed away at the age of 75. He's survived by family who say they're sad, but it's not the end of the world. And according to the Journal of Marine Sciences, a baby blue whale can gain 10 pounds in 1 hour, which kind of reminds me of myself this past Thanksgiving. And new research shows that hypnosis could be an alternative to opioids for pain relief. But there are side effects, like getting sleepy. Very sleepy. Lastly, a Florida man found a $1 million lottery ticket while he was doing housework. The odds of winning were 1 in 2.77 million, which ironically are the exact same odds of me doing actual housework. On this week's show, we've got someone whose name you might not immediately recognize, but his discoveries you've likely heard of. Ben Raines is responsible for finding the wreckage of the last slave ship to America, the Clotilda. He was also involved in identification of an unprecedented prehistoric forest found deep in the Gulf of Mexico. His new book, Saving America's Amazon, it's going to blow you away. You'll really want to hear what he has to say, so don't go away. We'll be right back after these messages. G? Our featured guest tonight has spent the better part of his life fighting to preserve and protect the natural beauty of Mobile, Alabama, and the Gulf of Mexico. His discovery of the Clotilda is well known, but his new book, Saving America's Amazon, is his most eye-opening and possibly most important work yet. The things in this book are so very important. Frankly, I think they should be taught in schools across America. Please give a warm weekly show welcome to author, filmmaker, and environmentalist Ben Raines. Ben, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, David. I'm glad to be here.
Many of our viewers know who you are from your environmental films and discoveries like the Clotilda. But what originally brought you into conservatism and the environmental research all those years ago? I mean, where did it all start?
Well, probably on a boat with a fishing rod in my hand. My grandparents actually owned a motel in Panama City on the beach, so I grew up spending every vacation there. And that had a lot to do with it. I was kind of one of those water babies, and that just persisted, through my adult life. Even when I went to college in New York City, I was actually out there fishing in the East River. And you could say I'm a failed marine biologist in some measure. That was kind of my heart's desire, and then I ran into organic chemistry, and ended up switching to film school. So it's a big change there, but.
Now, you've talked about, in other places, about the importance of local newspapers and local media in holding the local governments and businesses accountable for the environment. Since those things are now starting to fall by the wayside, I mean, what do we do now? I mean, is there a solution?
Well, there is, and a lot of it is sort of citizen advocacy. It's kind of a return to the 1800s. Many of the great scientific discoveries were made by just people who weren't trained or whatever. They were just out there observing the world. And so that's kind of where we are now. The media is so fractured, but we are in such communication still. And so, we can actually use the social media world for a lot of the same purposes. And that's what we're going to have to do. when the newspaper was the big force in town and in every town around America, it was kind of a one-stop shop for anybody who wanted to protect the environment. And it would be on the front page and everybody would know all at the same time. So the challenge now is to cut through all the noise and, get to where people can care about things and appreciate the things they need to. It is definitely a challenge and a challenging environment. But that's kind of, that's why I've written the new book, Saving America's Amazon. It's sort of my love letter to this place and trying to make people care about it. And then, writ large. Just last Sunday, the LA Times ran almost the entire first chapter of the book. Now, who would have thought that, Los Angeles would be running a whole chapter about Alabama? But that's kind of where we are now. So you've got to get the word out and try and reach as many people as possible.
Now, before we move on to the new book, we've got to chat about your recent discoveries. First, the Clotilda. How in the world did that happen? I mean, was this a happy accident or were you intentionally looking for it?
Oh, no, I was intentionally looking for it. There was an accident along the way where I found the wrong ship originally. But it actually started in a really organic way. The local radio station, 106.5, Sean Sullivan had a City of Mobile historian named John Sledge on. John is expert in maritime things and architectural things. He had just written a new book about the Mobile River called The Mobile River. Sean's interviewing him about it, and John just says offhand, what would be really incredible is if we could find the Clotilda. Now, this is in 2017. So a friend of mine named Jeff Dute, who is a longtime fishing guide and used to be the outdoors guy for the Press Register, heard John on the radio, called me up and said, you should look for the Clotilda. So that was the origin. And I actually dug into the history and started reading everything. And in that, I found, the captain's journals are at the Mobile Library. And, you can see them in the digital archives and read them. They're handwritten. But reading them as a person who knows the Delta, fairly intimately at this point, from covering it and then, running charters in it, I read things in his journal that compared to the captain who sailed the ship, they didn't make sense. There was a lie about where the ship was that had prevented it from being discovered for 150 years. So cutting through that was what set me on the course. And it was definitely not an accident to find it, but it took a lot of work and there was some heartache along the way for me.
What did you feel down there in the water or on the surface when you realized you might have actually found the actual Clotilda?
It was pretty overwhelming because by that point, as I mentioned, I found the wrong ship first. And I thought it was the Clotilda. A team of archaeologists thought it was the Clotilda, made international news. And that brought a larger team of archaeologists here with the Slave Wrecks Project. They studied the first wreck I found, and after 2 days, they knew it wasn't the Clotilda. So I had this sort of international humiliation where I had told the world I may have found the ship, and then I was the guy who didn't find it. So coming up out of the water holding the first piece that turned out to be the Clotilda, the first piece to see the light of day in 160 years. Right. Now, I was cautious. I was like, oh, brother, here we go again. But at the same time, I felt like this has got to be it. And by that point, I knew how important it was to the people of Africatown and to the world at large. And it was, I can look back on it now, and it was an incredibly powerful experience. As a journalist, it's all about doing something that matters to people. Something that changes, the catchphrase you'll hear editors say is change hearts, lives, and laws. And that, it was a moment where that happened. It has changed people's lives, all over the world because the Clotilda is this icon. It's the last slave ship. It's the last ship that brought slaves to America. So, when you look at the Clotilda, it's actually something that represents all slave ships. There were 20,000 in the 400 years of the slave trade. We've only found 13, counting Clotilda, and only one brought slaves to America, and that's the Clotilda. So for the people, the descendants of slaves everywhere, with the Clotilda, we know more about those people who were on it than we know about any other slaves in the history of United States slavery. Oh, wow. We know exactly where they were from. We know where they were caught, when they were caught, in Africa, who captured them. We know who sold them. We know how much they paid for them. We know who bought them. We know the ship that brought them to America. We know what happened to them when they got here, and we know where their descendants are today. There is no other slave record like that.
Wow.
So it becomes a proxy for everybody whose ancestors came here in the hold of a ship. And their stories, which are very well documented at this point, the personal stories of the Clotilda passengers, represent what happened for everybody who arrived here in chains. And so it's a really powerful legacy that is rippling out even as we speak.
Yeah, that's really, really heavy when you think about it.
It really is.
Are there any other treasures down there that we've never located or been able to excavate in this area?
Yes. Yes, the Pioneer 2, the first submarine. The Hunley was the first submarine used in battle. But the first military submarine is in Mobile Bay and has never been found.
Oh, wow.
I am trying to find it. So far, I haven't gotten very far. And that would be quite an artifact to have. The Hunley was built here in Mobile. And the reason it was built because the one I'm talking about sank the first time they took it out. They were towing it out into the Gulf to go underwater. They had the hatch open. A big wave came, filled it up with water, and it sank.
I hate to laugh at that, but that's just, it is.
But that's what happened.
It's just stupidity. And you go, okay.
Yeah. And they were getting that last breath of fresh air before they went underwater. Because back then, oxygen was an issue. You seal up that hatch, and there are a bunch of guys in there. And, those submarines were powered with hand cranks. So they were exercising as they moved the thing. Literally, they were turning like bicycle pedals with their hands. So they're exerting, they're breathing. So anyway, that's there. There's a lot of gold here that has never been found. And pieces are found all the time. There's a famous story in the 70s. A man found a tremendous amount of gold on Fort Morgan. There are other stories you hear about gold up in the Delta. Now, I've never found a piece of gold, but that would be a lot of fun, too.
So, Ben, here's what I want to do. I want to go to a quick commercial break, pay the bills, and come back and talk about your new book and a few other things. Can you stick around?
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back with Ben Raines. And we are back with author, filmmaker, and environmentalist Ben Raines. So, Ben, your other major discovery has been the massive prehistoric forest sitting just off our coast in the Gulf of Mexico. How did you find it, and how did you know either where or even why to look?
Well, so I didn't discover it. I was the first person to take pictures of it and the first person to bring it to the world. The guy that owns the dive shop in Fairhope actually found it, a fellow named Chaz Broughton. And the way that the forest was found, after Hurricane Ivan, a fellow was out fishing and he found something that showed up on his bottom machine and started fishing there and catching a lot of fish. And he lost a rod that went over the side of the boat. So he went to the dive shop and asked if they could come look for his rod. Because, a lot of these offshore rods cost more than $1,000 by the time the reel and everything. So the dive shop went out there, went down to the bottom, just in an open Gulf of Mexico, and saw trees everywhere. So I actually learned to dive at that dive shop. And because I was the environment reporter at the time for the Press Register, the guy kept taunting me, at the dive shop, saying, I'll have to take you to, he called it the old river channel. He kept saying there's an old river channel out there with trees everywhere. And so it took me 4 years to get him to take me out there. So he finally did. And the moment I got down to the bottom, it was stunning. I've been diving all over the place. I've never seen trees rooted in the mud on the bottom of the ocean before. So as soon as I came up, I said, oh, God, we got to get scientists out here immediately. And that was the beginning. I did a story with video, and it went viral, the very first story. This is back about 2011 or so.
What could be its scientific and cultural significance?
So the scientific first, what we're talking about is a climate capsule, unlike anything else on Earth. There is nowhere else that we found in the ocean where trees are still rooted in the mud they were growing in that have been exposed. So looking at the mud around those trees, taking sediment cores, we've found, they found very ancient bugs even. So we're getting into Jurassic Park territory. But what we really get is a picture of the Gulf Coast climate 70,000 years ago. And it was not like it is today. We were in an ice age, so it was colder. But you can see that in the pollen that they found there and the seeds of the plants. What it tells us is that it was different than a modern Gulf Coast forest. It was like a forest you would find today in coastal Virginia. So somewhere that it snows, where there's regular frost even at the beach, that's what this forest was built for. The trees that live there, the plants that live there, were much more cold tolerant than what we find on the coast today. So we get a window through the trees into atmospheric levels of carbon and other gases and all that sort of stuff. It is a climate capsule. But then culturally, it's a natural wonder. It's like the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone. It is a natural feature that exists nowhere else on Earth. It's right here off our coast. It is Alabama's. That's the only place you can find it.
I mean, and to think that it's here, and then also to think about the fact that it does show such a difference in what the climate is now and what it was then.
Yeah, imagine Dauphin Island, Fort Morgan covered in snow. I love it.
Now, the rest of your work is wrapped up in the wonder and beauty of Mobile Bay and the Gulf, and trying to save it. Your new book seems like the next step forward in that direction. Tell us about the book and why you wrote it.
Well, Alabama is two things. It is the most diverse state in the United States. It has more species per square mile than any other state, and it is the leader in extinctions in the continental U.S. More animals and plants have been lost to extinction in Alabama since the 1800s than any other state except Hawaii. That's a stunning thing. And so we can't go on being, the king of diversity, especially of aquatic creatures, and the king of extinctions. So we've got to make a choice. Alabama has a long history, a relationship with its environment that's all about taking, never giving anything back, never protecting anything. We have the least funded environmental agency in the United States. It has ranked 50th for, I think, several decades in what it spends to protect the environment. And we have an incredibly aggressive industrial effort, bringing new industries in. Yeah. Well, part of that is easy to get permits here and government approval and stuff, but there's no reason we have to sacrifice our environment. So,
and part of the problem is it's more attractive for them to come here because they have cost savings, because they don't have to do as much here, but it comes at a cost to the environment and these species.
So that's where we get back to that idea I was talking about citizen scientists and citizen activists. We're the watchdogs. We have to do that now. So our environmental groups like the Coastal Foundation, Mobile Baykeeper, etc., they're vitally important because they now are our voice. They are big enough and loud enough that they can help when we point things out. But that's what it's all about. The book is a love letter to make people fall in love with our state and to make them understand that, sure, California's beautiful, but so's Alabama.
What do you mean by America's Amazon, and how far north does it go?
So some people complain that we already have an Amazon in the Americas, but this is America. We're the only country known as America. The Mobile River system, which ends in Mobile Bay, includes every river that drains into Mobile Bay. So it goes all the way up north of Birmingham, the whole state, and parts of Georgia, Tennessee, and Mississippi all drain into it. That is what I call America's Amazon because it is the king of diversity for aquatic species. The Amazon in South America is famous for having all kinds of wild species. Well, look at Alabama. We have 450 species of freshwater fish. The entire state of California has 110.
Why do you think this has never been taught in school about the biodiversity of the Mobile River Basin like we've been taught about the Amazon?
Because nobody knew. So when American biology was in its infancy, all the scientists were concentrated in our great learning institutions from the last century. In the Northeast, you've got Harvard and Dartmouth and Yale and Princeton. Out west, you've got Stanford. And so all these scientists were in those places, cutting their teeth as students, finding stuff. Well, that didn't really happen here in Alabama. This fact of our diversity really came to light in 2002. The Nature Conservancy produced a report through an organization called NatureServe, and they documented all the species in every state. Scientists all over the country were stunned to see Alabama as the leader in the number of fish species, the number of crawfish species, the number of mussel species, the number of snail species, the number of salamander species. Everybody was blown away. And that was the moment where it was suddenly, oh my gosh, Alabama's really diverse.
Now you've said elsewhere that people in Birmingham used to be able to catch mullet from the Gulf. Now,
absolutely.
How? Why? That seems crazy.
So we have a lot of rivers in Alabama, right, that drain down to the Gulf. We used to have almost 24 species of fish that migrated up those rivers, just like salmon do on the West Coast and the East Coast. Striped bass, the mullet, moon eyes. You could go on and on naming all these species. They used to migrate up the rivers, and they were carrying all this energy, just like salmon do. They would go to the Gulf, sturgeon. They would eat in the Gulf for years or a year. Then they would migrate up, take that energy up the rivers and die, or.
Is it kind of like the Auburn Tigers?
Yeah, kind of. So we built 30 major dams, and we cut that connection. Fish can no longer go upstream in our rivers. They're stopped by the dams. And so there are people alive today who used to catch mullet in the Cahaba River outside of Birmingham in cast nets.
Now, you've been on the ground and in the waters and in the weeds. What changes have you seen in your years of working on this stuff? Have you seen positive changes?
I've seen positive changes. Our environmental groups are much stronger. In some measure, parts of our environment are doing better. There's certainly a much greater appreciation for all this stuff I'm talking about, the diversity and everything. That's kind of a snowballing thing. And that's all to the good. People care. There are a lot more members of Mobile Baykeeper than there were 20 years ago. You can look just at the staffing of these organizations. 20 years ago, Mobile Baykeeper had a staff of 1. Now they got more than a dozen people, full-time staffers. That's a huge increase. But on the flip side, Mobile is still the largest American city I know of that doesn't recycle, doesn't have curbside recycling.
So, Ben, where can people go to find or buy your book, Saving America's Amazon?
So the book arrived in the United States yesterday. The ship is in New York. The book's going through customs right now. It is already available for sale on Amazon and Target and Barnes & Noble for pre-sale. It's also available for pre-sale signed copies from Page & Palette, which you can have shipped anywhere in the country, and the Alabama Booksmith in Birmingham. But it's going to be in bookstores everywhere starting December 15th. At least I hope, and if it's not in your bookstore, call them. But it publishes December 15th. That's when it'll be available for sale, and that's when those pre-orders ship out. So, it makes a great Christmas gift, even for people not in Alabama, a little hometown pride, and we can thumb our noses at them. We've got more crawfish than you.
Ben, thank you so much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, author, filmmaker, and environmentalist, Ben Raines.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. And I hope people love the book.
That is our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Special thanks to our guest, Ben Raines. Taking us home tonight, sitting in for our house band, the Mojile Still, my son, Gianni.